At our vow renewal, my husband said, "I'm finally marrying my soulmate." Then he turned to face the maid of honor instead of me. Everyone gasped and clapped. But when the priest opened the envelope I'd given him, my husband's face went completely white. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. My name is Margaret Thompson, and at 68 years old, I thought I had lived through all of life's surprises. How wrong I was. Standing there in that church, wearing the same pearl necklace my mother had given me for my first wedding, I watched my entire world crumble and rebuild itself in the span of 10 minutes. But to understand what really happened that day, you need to know who I was before that moment. I've always been the woman who puts everyone else first. My children joke that I probably apologized to the doctor for taking too long during my own birth. Growing up as the eldest daughter of immigrant parents, I learned early that love meant sacrifice. My hands, now weathered and marked with age spots, have held countless patients' hands during my 40-year career as a night shift nurse. These same hands raised 3 beautiful children, while my husband Robert built his construction empire from nothing. When Sarah, my eldest, was diagnosed with dyslexia, I spent every free hour researching teaching methods and working with her until she graduated valedictorian. When my son Michael's baseball dreams were crushed by a car accident, I was the one who held him through months of physical therapy, never letting him give up. My youngest, Jennifer, still calls me every morning just to hear my voice, even though she lives 3,000 miles away in Seattle. The community knows me as the lady who never misses a chance to help. Every Thanksgiving, our garage transforms into a food distribution center. During the pandemic, I sewed over 300 masks for the local hospital where I used to work. My garden, which takes up most of our backyard, produces vegetables that feed 5 struggling families in our neighborhood. The local food bank director once said I was their most reliable volunteer, never missing a single Tuesday shift in 15 years. But perhaps my greatest sacrifices were for Robert. When we met at a church dance in 1980, he was a charming young man with calloused hands and dreams bigger than his bank account. I fell in love with his ambition and his promise to build us a life worth living. What I didn't know then was how much of myself I would pour into making his dreams come true. Twice his construction business nearly collapsed. The first time was in 1991 during the recession. I sold every piece of jewelry my grandmother had left me, including a diamond ring that had been in our family for 3 generations. The second time was in 2008 when the housing market crashed. That time, I cashed out my entire inheritance from my parents' estate, nearly $200,000 that was meant to be our retirement security. Both times, Robert promised he would make it up to me. Both times, I believed him because that's what love does, isn't it? It believes in second chances and third chances, and whatever chances it takes. I worked night shifts at the hospital for 30 years. Coming home at 7 in the morning to get the kids ready for school, sleeping for 4 hours if I was lucky, then starting dinner and homework help before heading back to work. Robert needed to focus on the business, he said. The family needed me to be strong, he said. And I was strong, even when my body ached and my eyes burned from exhaustion. 10 years ago, when Robert was diagnosed with prostate cancer, I took early retirement to care for him. Those 6 months of chemotherapy and radiation were brutal, but I never left his side. I learned to give injections, manage medications, and hold him when he cried from the pain. I told him every day that we would get through it together, that our love was stronger than any disease. When he went into remission, he held me and swore he would spend whatever time he had left showing me how much I meant to him. My best friend Claire was there through all of it. She'd been my maid of honor at our first wedding, and when Robert suggested we renew our vows for our 42nd anniversary, I immediately asked her to stand beside me again. Claire, who held my hand when I miscarried our 4th child while Robert was away on business. Claire, who knew all my secrets and fears. Claire, who I trusted more than anyone except Robert himself. Looking back now, I realize the signs were there. But when you've spent your entire life seeing the best in people, You become blind to their worst. Life at 68 had settled into a comfortable rhythm, like a favorite song you could hum without thinking. Every morning at 5:30, I would slip out of bed carefully, trying not to wake Robert, even though he always stirred anyway. He'd mumble something sweet and unintelligible before rolling back to sleep, and I'd pause at the doorway just to watch him breathe for a moment. After 42 years, I still felt grateful to wake up beside him. The kitchen was my sanctuary in those early hours. I'd start Robert's coffee brewing while I prepared his lunch for the construction site. 2 turkey sandwiches on whole wheat, an apple cut into slices because he wouldn't eat it whole, and always a note tucked inside. Love you to the moon, or my heart is yours. Simple messages that made him smile. He told me once that his crew teased him about those notes, but he kept every single one in a drawer at his office. By 6:15, I was in the garden talking to my tomatoes and checking on the squash. Mr. Peterson from next door would often lean over the fence with his own coffee, and we'd discuss the weather and his grandson's college applications. His wife had passed 3 years ago, and these morning conversations seemed to anchor his days. I made sure to grow extra cucumbers because they were her favorite, and he couldn't bear to grow them himself. Tuesdays and Thursdays were my volunteer days at the food bank, but Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays belonged to the grandchildren. I'd pick them up from school, and our kitchen would transform into homework central. Emma, Sarah's daughter, would spread her art projects across the table while the twins, Michael's boys, worked on multiplication tables. They called me Grandma Maggie, and their laughter filled spaces in my heart I didn't know were empty. Sunday dinners were sacred in the Thompson household. All 3 of my children, their spouses, and the grandkids would gather around our dining room table that Robert had built with his own hands 30 years ago. I'd spend Saturday preparing, making Jennifer's favorite pot roast, Michael's beloved green bean casserole, and Sarah's special request for homemade rolls. The house would fill with voices and stories, arguments over football games, and Jennifer's husband Thomas playing guitar while the kids sang off-key. Robert would sit at the head of the table, raising his glass for a toast every single Sunday. "To the woman who makes this all possible," he'd say, looking at me with those same brown eyes that had captured my heart decades ago. Everyone would cheer, and I'd blush like a schoolgirl, waving away the attention while secretly treasuring it. Wednesday lunches with Claire were another cornerstone of my week. We'd been meeting at the same little cafe downtown for 20 years, always at the corner booth by the window. She'd order the Caesar salad, I'd get the soup of the day, and we'd share a piece of chocolate cake while discussing everything from our health concerns to the latest family dramas. Claire knew about Sarah's marriage troubles before Sarah even told me. I knew about Claire's frustration with her divorce proceedings, or at least I thought I did. Evenings belonged to Robert and me. After dinner, we'd take our walk through the neighborhood, a ritual we'd maintained since our children were young. Back then, we pushed strollers and chased toddlers. Now we walked hand in hand, waving to neighbors and stopping to admire Mrs. Chen's roses or chat with the young couple who'd just moved in. Robert would point out houses his company had built, pride evident in his voice as he described the challenges of each project. Our favorite spot was the small park at the end of our street, where we'd sit on the bench we'd donated in memory of my parents. Robert would tell me about his day, the new contracts coming in, his plans to finally slow down and let Michael take over more responsibilities. I'd share stories from the food bank, update him on the grandchildren's achievements, and we'd plan our future travels. Italy was next on our list, a trip we'd been postponing for 20 years. The vow renewal had been Robert's idea, announced, over one of these evening walks. "Margaret," he'd said, stopping under the streetlight where he'd first kissed me after a date 43 years ago. "I want to marry you all over again. Show everyone that true love doesn't just last, it grows stronger." His eyes had seemed particularly bright that night, almost feverish with emotion. I'd attributed it to sentimentality, to the approaching anniversary and his gratitude for surviving cancer. Planning the renewal filled my days with a special kind of joy. I spent hours choosing flowers, tasting cakes, and finding the perfect dress. The guest list grew to 200 people, including family, friends, Robert's business associates, and our church community. Everyone seemed as excited as we were, constantly telling us how we were relationship goals and proof that love conquers all. This was my beautiful, ordinary life, and I had no reason to suspect it was all about to shatter. The first crack in my perfect world appeared on a Tuesday evening in March, 3 months before our vow renewal. Robert had called to say he'd be late again, the third time that week. "Big project meeting with the Riverside development team," he'd explained, his voice sounding strangely rehearsed. "Don't wait up, sweetheart, this could go until midnight." I'd stood in the kitchen holding the phone long after he'd hung up, staring at the pot roast that had been simmering for 3 hours. The Riverside project had been completed 2 months ago. I knew because I'd attended the ribbon-cutting ceremony with him, wearing the navy dress he loved, watching him beam with pride as the mayor shook his hand. Why would they still be having meetings about a finished project? That night, I sat alone at our dining table, the empty chair across from me feeling larger than usual. When Robert finally came home at 12:30, he smelled different. Not like cigarettes or alcohol, but like something floral and expensive. A scent that made my stomach tighten with an emotion I couldn't name. He kissed my forehead quickly, muttering about exhaustion, and headed straight to shower. He'd always kissed me on the lips when coming home, always, for 42 years. The following week brought more peculiarities. Robert, who had worn the same cologne since our wedding day, suddenly had a bottle of something new on his dresser. "Tom from accounting recommended it," he said when I asked, though Tom had retired 6 months ago. He'd started going to the gym at 5 in the morning, claiming Dr. Morrison had insisted on it for his heart. But when I ran into Dr. Morrison at the grocery store and thanked him for the advice, he looked puzzled and said he hadn't seen Robert since his last checkup a year ago. Then there was his phone. Robert had never been protective of it before, often asking me to check his messages while he drove or leaving it on the counter when he showered. Now it was always face down, always on silent, always in his pocket. Once, when it rang during dinner, I saw a name flash across the screen before he grabbed it. Claire Mobile. Why would Claire be calling Robert? And why would he ignore the call, his face flushing as he muttered something about telemarketers? Claire herself had become strangely elusive. Our Wednesday lunches, sacred for 2 decades, were suddenly being canceled. "Lawyer appointments," she'd text, followed by a sad face emoji. "This divorce is killing me. Rain check?" But when I drove past the cafe one Wednesday after my food bank shift, I saw her car in the parking lot. She was inside, at our usual table, alone with her Caesar salad and her phone, typing intently with a small smile on her face. The credit card statement started reflecting charges I didn't recognize. Marcel's, an upscale French restaurant downtown where entrees started at $60. We'd driven past it once, and Robert had laughed, saying, "Who needs fancy French food when I have your pot roast?" Yet there were 3 charges there in 1 month, always on days when Robert had claimed to be grabbing sandwiches at the site with his crew. There was a charge for Quinn's Jewelers, too, for $3,200. My birthday had passed 2 months ago with the usual roses and dinner at our favorite Italian place. Our anniversary wasn't for another 3 months. When I mentioned seeing the charge while paying bills, Robert's fork paused midway to his mouth. "Investment piece," he said after a beat, "for the company. Client appreciation gift." But his company had never given client gifts worth more than $100, and they always came from the corporate catalog with the company logo. The physical distance between us had grown too. Robert, who had spent 42 years pulling me close in his sleep, now stayed firmly on his side of our king-sized bed. When I reached for his hand during our evening walks, it felt limp in mine, distracted. He'd stopped commenting on my appearance, no longer noticing when I wore his favorite sundress or styled my hair the way he liked. One evening, while doing laundry, I found a receipt in his jacket pocket from Bloomingdale's for a black lace negligee, size small. I wore a large and hadn't worn black lace since our honeymoon. My hands shook as I held the delicate paper, my mind racing through explanations. Maybe it was for Sarah's birthday, but Sarah was pregnant with her fourth child and certainly wasn't a small. Jennifer in Seattle? The receipt was from our local store, paid in cash. I carefully placed the receipt back in his pocket and continued with the laundry, my movements mechanical, my mind churning. That night, I watched Robert across the dinner table as he talked about his day, studying his familiar features like a stranger's face. Who was this man who had shared my bed, my life, my everything for 4 decades? And more importantly, who was the woman wearing the small black lace negligee my husband had purchased with cash on a Tuesday afternoon when he was supposedly in budget meetings? The human mind is remarkably skilled at protecting itself from truths too painful to accept. Mine worked overtime that spring, crafting explanations for everything I'd seen, building walls of rationalization brick by brick. I became an expert at lying to myself, each lie more elaborate than the last, each one a desperate attempt to preserve the life I'd spent 42 years building. The cologne situation was easily explained, I told myself while making breakfast one morning. Robert was approaching 70, probably having his own crisis about aging. Didn't all men go through phases where they tried to recapture their youth? The gym membership, the new scent, even the distance in bed could all be attributed to his fear of getting older. I'd read about this in my women's magazines. It was normal, completely normal. Standing in front of the bathroom mirror, I studied my reflection critically. When had my jawline become so soft? When had these deep lines etched themselves around my eyes? I pulled my skin taut, remembering the smooth face Robert had fallen in love with. Perhaps I was the problem. I'd let myself go, become too comfortable, too predictable. That afternoon, I bought anti-aging cream that cost more than our weekly grocery bill and booked an appointment at the salon to cover the silver in my hair. "Mom, you look tired," Sarah mentioned during Sunday dinner, studying me with concern. "Is everything okay?" I forced a bright smile, the kind I'd perfected during Robert's cancer treatment. "Just the change of seasons, honey. You know how allergies affect me. Plus, your father's been snoring more lately. Might need to get him one of those breathing machines." Robert looked up from his pot roast, seemingly surprised. "I've been snoring?" "Like a freight train," I laughed, the sound hollow in my own ears. "But after 42 years, I'm used to it." The table erupted in familiar laughter, and the moment passed, but Sarah's eyes lingered on me, unconvinced. When Claire canceled our lunch for the 4th consecutive week, I stood in my kitchen composing understanding text messages. "Of course, honey. Divorce is so stressful. Take all the time you need. I'm here when you're ready." My fingers hesitated over the send button, remembering her car at the cafe, but I pressed it anyway. She was probably meeting with friends from her divorce support group. I couldn't expect to be her only source of comfort. The receipt for the lingerie haunted me, appearing in my mind at random moments. But one evening, while watching television, a commercial for Valentine's Day reminded me that Secretary's Day was coming up. Of course. Robert's secretary, Patricia, had been with him for 15 years. She was getting married in the fall. It must be an early wedding gift. The size made sense, too. Patricia was a tiny thing, barely 5 feet tall. How thoughtful of Robert to remember. I made a mental note to buy Patricia something from both of us. The Riverside project meetings took on a life of their own in my imagination. Perhaps they were planning a phase 2 that Robert hadn't mentioned yet. He probably didn't want to worry me with more work stress, knowing how I fretted about his health. The economy was tough. He was probably taking on extra projects to ensure our retirement was secure. What a fool I was, doubting such a devoted husband. I even rationalized the phone incident with Claire. She was probably calling to plan a surprise for our vow renewal. Yes, that had to be it. They were conspiring together to create something special, and Robert's flustered reaction was simply him trying to preserve the surprise. How wonderful that my best friend and husband were working together to make our day memorable. My sister Ruth called from Florida one evening, and I found myself painting a picture of marital bliss. "Robert's been so romantic lately," I heard myself saying, "planning all these special touches for the renewal. He's like a young man in love again." "That's wonderful, Maggie," Ruth replied, but something in her tone suggested skepticism. "You would tell me if anything was wrong, wouldn't you?" "What could possibly be wrong?" I laughed, twisting my wedding ring around my finger, a nervous habit I'd developed recently. "We're about to celebrate 42 years together. Life has never been better." After hanging up, I sat in the darkness of our living room, surrounded by photographs of our life together. Wedding pictures, baby photos, family vacations, Robert's business celebrations, my retirement party. Evidence of a life well lived, a love story for the ages. Whatever strange phase we were going through would pass. It had to pass. I went to bed that night reciting our history like a prayer. We'd survived poverty, miscarriages, cancer, and business failures. We'd raised 3 wonderful children. We'd built a life that was the envy of everyone who knew us. Whatever was happening now was just another test, another chapter in our epic love story. By the time we renewed our vows, everything would be perfect again. But even as I told myself these stories, my body knew the truth. I'd lost 8 pounds without trying, my appetite diminished by a constant knot in my stomach. Sleep became elusive, my mind racing through scenarios I wouldn't let myself fully examine. The woman in the mirror looked haunted, her eyes holding secrets she refused to speak aloud. The truth has a way of refusing to stay buried, no matter how deep we try to push it down. Mine surfaced on a Thursday afternoon in April, 2 months before our vow renewal, while I was searching for Robert's passport in his home office. We decided to book our Italy trip for right after the ceremony, and I needed the passport number for the travel agent. His desk drawer was slightly open, which was unusual. Robert was meticulous about his workspace, everything in its place, all drawers firmly closed. When I pulled it wider, my fingers found not his passport, but a credit card statement I'd never seen before. A Visa account I didn't know existed, in Robert's name alone, with a billing address listed as his office. My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper, my eyes scanning charges that made my blood run cold. The Ritz-Carlton, downtown, 3 separate occasions. Each charge was for over $400. Room service for 2, champagne. The Marcel's restaurant charges were here too, always for 2 dinners, paired with wine purchases that cost more than our monthly grocery budget. And there, at the bottom, the charge from Quinn's Jewelers I'd seen before, but with details this time. Diamond tennis bracelet, white gold, size 6.5. I wore size 7.5. I'd never owned a tennis bracelet. The room seemed to spin as I sank into Robert's leather chair, the statement crumpling in my grip. My rational mind immediately began its familiar dance of denial, but the evidence was too clear, too damning. This wasn't a business expense account. This was a secret credit card for a secret life I knew nothing about. With shaking fingers, I opened the other drawers, my guilt about invading Robert's privacy, overwhelmed by a desperate need to know. In the bottom drawer, beneath tax returns and business contracts, I found a small velvet box. Inside was a receipt for the tennis bracelet and a handwritten note. "Can't wait to see this on you, R." The handwriting was Robert's, but the sentiment was meant for someone else. I don't remember walking to the bedroom, but I found myself there, pulling Robert's suitcase from the closet. He'd been on a business trip to Chicago last week. When I opened it to unpack properly, something I'd been too tired to do when he returned, the smell hit me first. That same expensive floral perfume I'd noticed before, stronger now, clinging to his clothes. His dress shirt from the trip was folded neatly, but when I lifted it, a long auburn hair was wrapped around one of the buttons. My hair was silver gray now, had been for years. Even when it was colored, it had never been auburn. The collar of the shirt had a faint lipstick mark, coral pink, the kind of color a younger woman would wear. I hadn't worn lipstick in months, and never that shade. My phone buzzed with a text from Claire. "Sorry, honey, canceling lunch again tomorrow. This divorce is just consuming everything. Love you." Something about the timing felt wrong. I opened Facebook on my phone, something I rarely did, and searched for Claire's profile. Her last post was from 3 hours ago, a check-in at Nordstrom with the caption, "Retail therapy. Sometimes a girl just needs to treat herself." The first comment was from her friend Linda. "Get it, girl. You look happier than you have in years. That smile says everything." I clicked on the photo. Claire was holding shopping bags, wearing a new outfit I'd never seen, her hair freshly styled and colored. Auburn. She'd been blonde for as long as I'd known her, but now her hair was a rich, sophisticated auburn. On her wrist, catching the department store lights, was a tennis bracelet that looked exactly like white gold. My laptop was on the kitchen counter where I'd left it after checking recipes. With fingers that felt disconnected from my body, I logged into our joint bank account. I'd stopped scrutinizing it months ago, trusting Robert as I always had. Now I went back through 6 months of statements, printing each one, highlighting unexplained withdrawals. 10,000 here, 15,000 there, always in cash, always on days when Robert had meetings. In 6 months, nearly $50,000 had disappeared from our savings. $50,000 of the money I'd worked nights to earn, the money my parents had left us, the money meant for our grandchildren's education. The kitchen timer went off, startling me. Dinner. Robert would be home in an hour, expecting his usual Thursday meatloaf, would kiss my forehead with lips that had been God knows where, would tell me about his day with words that were probably all lies. The thought of serving him dinner, of pretending everything was normal, made bile rise in my throat. Instead, I gathered the papers, the credit card statement, photographed the shirt with its telltale hair and lipstick, and placed everything in a manila envelope. Then I did what I should have done weeks ago. I called my nephew James, the forensic accountant, and said 5 words I never thought I'd speak. "James, I need your help." The evidence was undeniable now, spread across my kitchen table like a roadmap to betrayal. The man I'd loved for 42 years and the woman I'd trusted for 30 were having an affair, and they weren't even trying very hard to hide it anymore. The confrontation came on a Sunday evening, 3 days after I'd found the evidence. I'd spent those days in agony, pretending everything was normal while my world crumbled inside. But I couldn't hold it in any longer. After our children left from Sunday dinner, I placed the manila envelope on the coffee table between us. "Robert, we need to talk." He was reaching for the TV remote, relaxed in his recliner, when he saw my face. The remote slipped from his fingers. "What's wrong, Margaret?" I pushed the envelope toward him with trembling hands. "I know about the affair." The color drained from his face so quickly, I thought he might faint. He didn't even try to deny it. Didn't reach for the envelope. Didn't ask what I was talking about. He just sat there, aging 10 years in 10 seconds. "How long?" My voice was steadier than I expected. "Margaret, how long, Robert?" He buried his face in his hands, shoulders shaking. 2 years. 2 years. 730 days of lies. When I was caring for him during his recovery from prostate cancer, he was already seeing her. The room tilted, and I gripped the arm of the sofa to steady myself. "Claire?" I whispered, though I already knew. He nodded, still unable to look at me. Then the words came pouring out, each one a knife to my heart. "It started at your mother's funeral. You were so consumed with grief, and Claire. She was there for me. I was weak, Margaret. I was stupid and weak. We tried to stop, but—" "My mother's funeral?" My voice cracked. "While I was burying my mother, you were starting an affair with my best friend? It wasn't supposed to happen." He finally looked up, tears streaming down his face. "But you were so distant, so focused on everyone else. Your mother, the kids, your volunteering. Claire made me feel young again, wanted. I was grieving. The scream tore from my throat. I was grieving my mother, and you were what? Feeling neglected? So you slept with Claire? It's more than that now. His words were barely a whisper. I love her, Margaret. I'm sorry, but I love her. The admission hung in the air like poison. 42 years of marriage reduced to an apology. The vow renewal, I said, the pieces clicking together. You never wanted to renew our vows. You wanted to... I was going to leave after the ceremony, he admitted. Make it look like we tried but couldn't work it out. That way, the business, the assets... Claire's lawyer said if we did it that way, you wouldn't be entitled to as much. Claire's lawyer, not her divorce lawyer, their lawyer, planning my financial destruction while eating lunch at our special cafe. I stood up, my legs surprisingly steady. Get out. Margaret, please, let me explain. Get out of my house, Robert, now. He stood slowly, looking lost in the home we'd built together. Where will I go? To Claire's, I imagine. Isn't that where you've been going anyway? As he gathered his things, mumbling about coming back for more tomorrow, I felt something inside me shift. The tears would come later. The rage would come later. But in that moment, watching the man I devoted my life to shuffle out the door to go to my best friend's bed, all I felt was a cold, clear determination. They thought they'd planned everything perfectly. They had no idea what I was capable of. My nephew James arrived at 9 the next morning with his laptop and a grim expression. A forensic accountant for the FBI, he'd driven 3 hours after my call. As he spread documents across my dining room table, the real scope of Robert and Claire's betrayal became horrifyingly clear. Aunt Maggie, this is worse than just an affair, James said, pulling up bank records on his screen. They've been systematically preparing to leave you with nothing. The evidence was meticulous and cruel. Robert had been transferring ownership of assets for 18 months. The construction company I'd saved twice with my inheritance was now officially owned by a shell corporation called RC Ventures. RC, Robert and Claire. Look at this, James pointed to incorporation documents. Claire is listed as the CFO. She's been on the payroll for a year, drawing a salary of $150,000 from the company you helped build. My stomach churned as more revelations surfaced. The vacation home in Lake Tahoe, bought with my father's inheritance, had been transferred to a trust with Claire as the sole beneficiary. Our investment portfolio, worth nearly $1 million, had been liquidated over 6 months. The funds wired to accounts in the Cayman Islands. He's been planning this since before his cancer went into remission, James muttered, cross-referencing dates. These transfers started while you were taking care of him. The house, our home where we'd raised 3 children, was the only asset still in both our names, but James found documents for a planned refinance that would have removed me from the deed. It was scheduled for the week after our vow renewal. There's more, James said quietly, pulling up insurance documents. Your life insurance policy. Robert increased it 6 months ago to $2 million, and he changed the beneficiary. Let me guess, I said, my voice hollow. Claire? Secondary beneficiary. Your kids are still primary, but there's a clause here. He studied the screen, his face darkening. If something happens to you within 2 years of the vow renewal and Robert is your legal spouse, he gets control of the disbursement as the executor. The implication hung heavy in the air. They weren't just planning to leave me financially destroyed, they'd set up a scenario where my death would benefit them. James pulled up Claire's divorce records. This is interesting. Her divorce was finalized 2 years ago, but she's been telling you it's ongoing. She's been canceling lunches for months, saying she had lawyer appointments. She was having appointments with lawyers, James said grimly, just not divorce lawyers. These withdrawals from your accounts match payments to Thompson, Mills, and Associates. They specialize in asset protection and wealth transfer. Piece by piece, the conspiracy revealed itself. Email records James recovered showed Robert and Claire had been meeting with financial advisors, real estate agents, and attorneys. They'd even visited retirement communities in Arizona, putting down deposits using money from our joint accounts. The cruelest discovery was a folder labeled M Transition. Inside were documents for placing me in a modest assisted living facility, budgeted at exactly the minimum Social Security would provide. They'd actually researched how to warehouse me while they lived off 4 decades of my sacrifice. They've stolen approximately $1.8 million in assets, James calculated, and they positioned themselves to take another $1 million after the vow renewal. I stared at the wedding photo on the wall, Robert's young face smiling back at me. He was never going to leave me, I realized. He was going to destroy me first, then leave. James placed his hand over mine. We're going to stop them, Aunt Maggie, and we're going to make them pay. After James left that evening, promising to return with a lawyer friend, the house fell into unbearable silence. I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by 42 years of memories, and felt something inside me shatter like fine china dropped from a great height. The sobs came first, violent and uncontrollable. I collapsed onto the cold tile floor, the same floor where I'd taught Sarah to take her first steps, where Michael had proposed to his wife, where Jennifer had announced her pregnancy. My body shook as decades of suppressed exhaustion and sacrifice crashed over me in waves. I crawled to the living room, pulling myself onto the couch where Robert and I had spent thousands of evenings. The photo albums on the coffee table mocked me. Our wedding day, I was 19, glowing with hope, believing I'd found my forever. There was Claire beside me as maid of honor, radiant in yellow, whispering in my ear that I was the luckiest girl alive. The memories assaulted me relentlessly. That first year when we lived on ramen and love, and I worked double shifts while 7 months pregnant so Robert could start his business. The night I miscarried our 4th child alone in a hospital bed while Robert was at a crucial meeting. Was he with someone else even then? The morning I found him crying after his cancer diagnosis, promising him we'd fight together, that our love would see us through anything. I remembered selling my grandmother's pearl necklace to make payroll for his workers, taking out a second mortgage without telling the children because Robert swore it was temporary. The nights I came home from 12-hour shifts to find him asleep, never wondering why he was too tired when he'd supposedly been in the office all day. My hands ached suddenly, and I looked down at them. Nurses' hands, mothers' hands, hands that had held dying patients and crying babies, hands that had signed away my inheritance to save his dreams. These hands had given everything, and for what? To be discarded like medical waste, too contaminated to keep around. The photo from last Christmas stared up at me. The entire family gathered around the tree I decorated, Robert's arm around my shoulders, Claire beside us raising a glass of wine. They were already together then. Every "I love you" was a lie. Every kiss was a betrayal. Every family gathering was a performance, while they counted down to my destruction. I thought about the food bank, where I'd spent thousands of hours believing I was making a difference. The church fundraisers I'd organized while Robert and Claire were in hotel beds I was unknowingly paying for. The masks I'd sewn during COVID while they planned my financial execution. Was my entire life's purpose just to be a resource for others to exhaust and discard? The grandfather clock Robert had given me for our 20th anniversary chimed midnight. 22 years ago, he'd said it would count our endless hours together. Now it counted the hours since I discovered I'd been loving a cruel stranger who'd watched me sacrifice everything while planning to leave me with nothing. I lay on that couch until dawn, too broken to move, too empty to cry anymore. Somewhere in those dark hours between grief and rage, something else was born. If they wanted to bury the woman who'd given them everything, then that woman would die. But what would rise from her ashes would be something they never expected. The morning sun found me still on the couch, eyes swollen, throat raw. But something had changed in those pre-dawn hours. My phone buzzed with a text from my grandson, Tyler, Sarah's oldest. "Grandma, Mom told me you're going through something. Remember what you taught me when I was bullied in middle school? You said Thompsons don't stay down. We get up, dust off, and show them what we're made of. Love you." I sat up slowly, Tyler's words echoing in my mind. How many times had I given that advice? To my children when they face challenges, to patients fighting illness, to women at the shelter where I volunteered. Yet here I was, violating my own fundamental truth. The doorbell rang. My elderly neighbor, Mr. Peterson, stood there with a steaming casserole dish. "Made too much lasagna," he said gently. "Thought you might not be cooking today." He'd seen Robert loading suitcases into his truck. "Margaret, when Dorothy died, you told me something. You said the best revenge against death was to live even harder. Maybe the same applies to other kinds of losses." After he left, I found myself in my garden. My tomatoes were thriving despite my recent neglect, reaching toward the sun with determination that didn't care about human drama. I knelt in the dirt, my hands working automatically, and remembered my father's words when my mother was diagnosed with dementia. "Life tries to break us, Maggie. Our job is to refuse to break." My phone rang. It was my daughter Jennifer from Seattle. "Mom, I don't know what Dad's done, but I know you. You're the strongest woman I've ever met. You survived Grandma's death, Dad's cancer, that terrible accident when Michael was 10. You're going to survive this, too, but this time, you're going to do more than survive." Something shifted inside me as I pulled weeds with newfound vigor. For 42 years, I'd been Robert's wife, Claire's friend, everyone's caregiver. But who was I before that? I was Margaret Ann Sullivan, valedictorian of my high school, who won a full nursing scholarship. I was the girl who organized a strike at the hospital for better wages. I was the woman who single-handedly kept a construction company afloat through 2 recessions. That afternoon, I stood before my bathroom mirror. The woman staring back looked defeated, aged, discarded. But in her eyes, I saw something else. A flicker of the 20-year-old who'd told her father she didn't need his permission to marry Robert, the 30-year-old who'd delivered her own baby in a snowstorm when the midwife couldn't arrive, the 50-year-old who'd learned enough construction law to save Robert from bankruptcy. I thought about Claire and Robert, probably celebrating their victory. Right now, confident they'd broken me. They'd calculated everything except one variable. They'd never actually seen me fight for myself. Every battle I'd fought had been for someone else. I picked up my phone and called James. "I'm ready to fight back." "Good," he said. "The lawyer can meet us tomorrow." "No," I said, my voice stronger than it had been in years. "Set up the meeting, but first I have my own plan. The vow renewal is in 8 weeks. They want to use it as their stage? Fine. But I'm going to be the one writing the script." I walked to my closet and pulled out the dress I'd bought for the renewal. Elegant, expensive, perfect for a woman renewing her vows. It would also be perfect for a widow reclaiming her life. They thought they knew Margaret, the devoted wife. They were about to meet Margaret, the survivor. The war room was my kitchen table, covered with legal documents, financial records, and a detailed timeline James and I had constructed. My lawyer, Patricia Chen, a sharp woman who'd handled high-profile divorces, sat across from me with predatory focus. "They've been sloppy," Patricia said, reviewing the evidence. "Arrogant. They thought you'd never look, never fight. That's our advantage." My plan was methodical. First, James had already frozen the Cayman accounts through his FBI contacts, flagging them for potential fraud investigation. The money wasn't gone, just temporarily inaccessible to Robert and Claire. Second, I hired a private investigator, Marcus Williams, a former police detective who specialized in infidelity cases. Within a week, he had photographs of Robert and Claire at hotels, kissing in parking lots, and entering her apartment together. But the gold was the audio he captured from the construction office. Robert and Claire discussing their plan, laughing about how clueless I was, planning their Arizona retirement with my money. I need everything documented, I told Marcus. Every meeting, every conversation you can legally record. I want a file so thick they won't be able to deny anything. The third phase was delicate. I contacted Robert's biggest client, George Morrison, who'd been at our wedding. I showed him the evidence of Robert transferring company assets to shell corporations. George was furious. He'd been doing business with Robert based on the company's reputation, which I'd helped build. He agreed to delay announcing his next project until after the vow renewal. Patricia discovered something crucial. The asset transfers weren't properly filed. Robert had been waiting until after the renewal to complete them, thinking a fresh start after our supposed reconciliation would look less suspicious. Every document needed my signature to be legal, signatures he'd been planning to forge. "We're going to let him think his plan is working," Patricia explained. "Don't challenge anything yet. Let them get comfortable." I met with Father Michael, who would be officiating the renewal, a kind man who'd known our family for 20 years. He was horrified by what I showed him. "What do you need from me, Margaret?" I handed him a sealed envelope. "When Robert finishes his vows, before I say mine, I need you to read this. Can you do that?" "It would be my honor," he said, his usually gentle face hardened with righteous anger. The masterpiece of my plan involved the children. I met with each of them separately, showing them what their father had done. Sarah cried. Michael punched a wall. Jennifer flew in from Seattle, fury radiating from every pore. They all agreed to attend the renewal, to act normal, to trust their mother. I accessed Robert's email one night. He'd never changed his password from Margaret 1980, our wedding year. I found correspondence with vendors, the guest list, every detail of the renewal. I made a few adjustments. The photographer would now be someone I hired, instructed to capture specific moments. The videographer would ensure everything was recorded in high definition. The final piece came from an unexpected source. Claire's ex-husband, Daniel, contacted me. "I heard she's been spreading lies about our divorce," he said. "Truth is, I left her because she was stealing from my business. I have proof if you need it." By mid-May, 6 weeks before the renewal, everything was in place. I continued playing the ignorant wife, even calling Robert occasionally about renewal details, letting him hear the defeat in my voice. He'd comfort me, tell me he was just stressed about work, that everything would be better after we renewed our vows. "Yes," I'd agree sweetly, "everything will be different after the renewal." July 15th arrived with perfect weather, as if God himself wanted to ensure maximum visibility for what was about to unfold. The morning sun streamed through my bedroom window as I prepared for what everyone believed would be a celebration of enduring love. My hands were steady as I zipped up the ivory dress I'd chosen months ago, back when I still believed in the fairy tale. Sarah arrived early to help with my hair, her fingers gentle as she worked with the curling iron. "You look beautiful, Mom," she said, meeting my eyes in the mirror. We both knew what she really meant. "You look strong." The church parking lot was already filling when we arrived. 200 guests, all dressed in their finest, ready to witness what the invitation had called a testament to true love. Robert's business partners, our neighbors, church family, childhood friends who'd flown in from across the country. My stomach tightened seeing how many people he was willing to deceive. Inside the bridal preparation room, Claire bustled around in her maid of honor dress, a flowing choral number that complemented her auburn hair. She'd been texting frantically all morning, probably with Robert, making sure their plan was still in motion. When she saw me, she rushed over with practiced concern. "Oh, Maggie, you look absolutely radiant." She adjusted my necklace, her fingers cold against my skin. "Nervous?" "No," I said, looking directly into her eyes. "I know exactly what's going to happen today." Something flickered across her face, but she recovered quickly. "Of course. It's going to be perfect." Through the window, I watched Robert greeting guests in the courtyard. playing the devoted husband to perfection. He looked handsome in his navy suit, the one I'd helped him pick out, paid for with the credit card he didn't know I'd been monitoring. He kept checking his phone, his jaw tense despite his smile. George Morrison arrived with his wife, making a point to wave at me through the window. Robert intercepted them, his salesman charm on full display, still hoping to secure the contract he thought was coming. George played along beautifully, letting Robert believe everything was normal. My nephew James positioned himself in the third row, his phone ready to record everything. Patricia Chen sat 2 rows behind him, looking elegant in her black suit, a folder of legal documents in her designer bag. The private investigator, Marcus, was dressed as a wedding photographer's assistant, his camera capturing every arrival. Father Michael pulled me aside in the hallway. "The envelope is safe," he assured me, patting his vestment pocket. "I've read it several times." "Margaret, are you certain about this?" "Father, I've never been more certain of anything in my life." The organ music began, Bach's Jesu, Joy of Man's Desiring floating through the sanctuary. My grandson Tyler appeared, offering his arm. "Ready, Grandma?" "Ready." The church was packed. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across the white roses I'd chosen for their symbolism. New beginnings and secrets revealed. Robert stood at the altar, his face composed, but his hands clasped too tightly. Claire took her position as maid of honor, smiling at the crowd while shooting meaningful glances at Robert. As I walked down the aisle, I cataloged faces. There was Linda Patterson, Robert's secretary, looking confused, probably wondering about that lingerie he'd claimed was for her. There were the Johnsons from next door, the Wheelers from Robert's golf club, my book club ladies, the entire church council. Robert's best man, his brother Tom, looked uncomfortable. Had he known? Tom's wife Karen was crying already, touched by what she thought was a beautiful moment. If only she knew. I reached the altar and Robert took my hands. They were sweating. Good. "Dearly beloved," Father Michael began, his voice carrying to every corner of the sanctuary. "We are gathered here today for what was meant to be a renewal of vows between Robert and Margaret Thompson." Was meant to be. I saw Robert's slight frown at the phrasing. Father Michael continued with the traditional opening, but I wasn't listening. I was watching Robert's face, seeing the moment approach. He'd written his own vows, he'd told me, something special for the occasion. Oh, I was counting on it. "Robert," Father Michael said, "please recite your vows." Robert squared his shoulders, pulled out his phone where he'd saved his speech, and cleared his throat. The church fell silent, 200 people leaning forward to hear his words of love and devotion. Claire stepped slightly closer, her hand moving to her heart in what anyone else would interpret as emotion for her best friend's happiness. "Margaret," Robert began, his voice strong and clear, 42 years ago, I made a promise to love you. Today I stand here to tell you—" He paused for effect, turning toward the congregation with a smile. "I'm finally marrying my soulmate." The words hung in the air for a heartbeat before Robert turned, not to me, but to Claire. She stepped forward, her face glowing with triumph, reaching for his outstretched hand. Gasps erupted through the church, followed by confused applause from those who thought this was some sort of planned, romantic gesture. "My darling Claire," Robert continued, his voice thick with emotion, "you've shown me what real love means. Margaret, I'm sorry, but I can't continue this charade. I'm in love with Claire, and we— Just a moment." Father Michael's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. He pulled the envelope from his vestment, his hand steady as he broke the seal. "Before we proceed with whatever this is, Margaret has asked me to read something." Robert's face drained of color. "What? No, that's not part of—" "Please sit down, Mr. Thompson." Father Michael's tone brooked no argument. The church fell silent, electric with tension. Father Michael unfolded the papers, adjusted his glasses, and began. Dear friends and family, what you're witnessing today is not a renewal of vows, but the unveiling of a 2-year conspiracy of betrayal, theft, and attempted financial destruction. Claire stumbled backward. Robert lunged for the papers, but Tom, his own brother, grabbed his arm. "Let him read it, Robert." Father Michael continued. "The woman standing beside me as maid of honor has been having an affair with my husband for 2 years, beginning at my mother's funeral while I grieved. But adultery was only the beginning. Marcus, the private investigator, began projecting images onto the church's large screen typically used for hymn lyrics. There they were, Robert and Claire at hotels, kissing in her doorway, toasting champagne in the restaurant where Robert had proposed to me 43 years ago. Together," Father Michael read on, "they have conspired to steal approximately $1.8 million in assets, including my inheritance, our business, and our life savings." Patricia Chen stood up holding documents. "These are fraudulent transfer papers, evidence of embezzlement, and proof of conspiracy to commit financial elder abuse. The FBI has been notified." The projection screen now showed bank statements, forged documents, emails between Robert and Claire, planning my destitution. Someone in the back screamed, Robert's sister recognizing her mother's jewelry in a photo, pieces that were supposed to be in my safe, but were now adorning Claire. "But wait," Father Michael said, his voice carrying over the growing pandemonium. "There's more." The screen displayed a life insurance policy with my name, the $2 million amount circled, Claire listed as beneficiary. Then came the assisted living facility brochure with my photo crudely pasted on the admissions form, the budget calculations showing how they'd planned to warehouse me. George Morrison stood up. "Robert Thompson, consider our business relationship terminated. I don't work with men who destroy their wives." Robert's legs gave out. He collapsed into the front pew, his face gray. Claire tried to run but found the doors blocked by 2 FBI agents James had arranged to be there. Her exit strategy, like everything else, had been anticipated. "Claire Morrison," one agent said, his badge gleaming, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and embezzlement." But I wasn't done. I took the microphone from Father Michael, my voice steady and clear. "Robert, you thought you were so clever. You didn't know I inherited $2 million from my great-aunt Eleanor 6 months ago. I never told you because I wanted to surprise you for our anniversary." This was a lie, but he'd never know that. His eyes widened in horror, calculating what he'd thrown away. "You also didn't know," I continued, "that every asset transfer you attempted required my signature to be legal. Every document you filed is fraudulent. The FBI has frozen all accounts, and you'll be joining Claire shortly." Daniel, Claire's ex-husband, stood up from the back row. "Oh, and Claire, remember telling everyone I was abusive? I brought the real divorce papers. You were divorced for embezzling from my company. Seems you have a pattern." The church erupted. Robert's business partners were on their phones with lawyers. Our children stood together, creating a protective wall around me. The photographer I'd hired captured every second. Robert's collapse, Claire's arrest, the congregation's shock. "One more thing," I announced. "The money recovered from their scheme will be donated to the Women's Financial Recovery Foundation, helping women who've been financially abused by their partners." As the FBI led Claire out in handcuffs, she turned to me, her carefully constructed mask finally cracking. "You knew? You knew all along?" "I learned from the best liars, didn't I?" I replied. "The difference is, I lied to expose the truth. You lied to destroy an innocent woman who loved you like a sister." Robert was escorted out next, but not before looking at me one last time. "Margaret, please. Your things are in storage unit 47B on Riverside," I said calmly. "The bill is paid through the end of the month. After that, it's your problem. Just like everything else in your life from now on." The church doors closed behind them with a definitive thud that echoed through the sanctuary, like the ending of a very long book. 6 months after the wedding, that wasn't. I stood in my kitchen, preparing Thanksgiving dinner. But everything about this holiday was different. The kitchen itself had been renovated, not with Robert's gaudy preferences for steel and granite, but with warm butcher block counters and the farmhouse sink I'd always wanted. The house felt lighter somehow, as if removing Robert's presence had literally brightened every room. The doorbell rang, and Tyler answered it, ushering in Mr. Peterson from next door. He'd become a regular at our family dinners now, bringing his homemade apple pie and stories that actually made us laugh. "Margaret," he said, kissing my cheek with a warmth that was friendship evolving into something more, "you look radiant." And I was. The stress lines that had mapped my face for years had softened. I'd gained back the weight I'd lost during those horrible months of suspicion and discovery. My hair, which I'd kept colored for Robert's preference, was now its natural silver, styled in a becoming cut that Sarah had talked me into. "Grandma Maggie!" The twins burst through the door, followed by Michael and his wife. "Did you see the news? Dad's trial started today." Robert's trial had indeed begun. He faced 15 years for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. His lawyer had reached out repeatedly, begging me to speak on his behalf, to remember the good times. I'd sent back a one-word response: no. The construction company, once recovered from the Shell Corporation, had been sold legitimately. The proceeds, combined with the recovered stolen funds, had not only restored my financial security, but had funded something remarkable. The Margaret Thompson Center for Financial Recovery had opened 3 months ago, offering free legal and financial counseling to women escaping financial abuse. We'd already helped 47 women recover hidden assets and rebuild their lives. Claire's situation was even more pathetic. Sentenced to 5 years with possible parole in 3, she'd lost everything. Her ex-husband Daniel had successfully sued for damages from her previous embezzlement, claiming the assets she'd hidden during their divorce. The country club expelled her. Her society friends abandoned her. Even her sister refused her calls. I'd received one letter from her begging forgiveness, claiming Robert had manipulated her. I'd returned it unopened. "Mom, you need to see this," Jennifer called from the living room where the news was playing. There was Robert on screen, handcuffed, being led into court. He looked 20 years older, his hair completely gray, his shoulders bent. The reporter mentioned he'd lost his business, his reputation, and faced bankruptcy from legal fees. "Turn it off," I said calmly. "Today is about gratitude, not the past." The dining room filled with my family. All 3 children, their spouses, my 4 grandchildren, and new additions. James had brought his fiancée, a fellow FBI agent he'd met during the investigation. Patricia Chen had become a close friend and arrived with her family. Even Marcus, the private investigator, stopped by with his wife to drop off flowers, staying for coffee and pie. Tom, Robert's brother, had chosen my side after the revelation. He sat at the far end of the table with Karen, having publicly severed ties with Robert. "You were always the real heart of this family, Margaret," he told me. "We just didn't realize it until you stopped holding everything together for him." After dinner, as we sat around the fireplace, Sarah raised her glass to Mom, who taught us that sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to be destroyed by those who don't deserve our sacrifice. To Grandma, Tyler added, who showed us that starting over at any age isn't just possible, it's powerful. Later, as the house quieted and Mr. Peterson helped me with dishes, he mentioned something that made me pause. "You know, Margaret, Robert did you a favor, in a way." "How so?" "He set you free to discover who you really are, and that woman, she's magnificent." That night, I stood in my bedroom, not ours, and looked at my reflection. The woman staring back wasn't the exhausted wife who discovered betrayal 8 months ago. This was Margaret Thompson, entrepreneur, advocate, survivor. At 69, I was dating a kind man who brought me flowers every Friday. I was traveling. Next month to Italy, the trip Robert had promised, but never delivered. I was taking dancing lessons with my girlfriends from the support group I'd started. My phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. Opening it, I found a message. "This is Patricia, Robert's former secretary. Thank you for the severance package and the recommendation letter. I start my new job Monday. You didn't have to do that after I kept his secrets." I typed back, "Everyone deserves a second chance to do the right thing. You were a victim too." Because that was the difference between me and Robert. He had used people's weaknesses to destroy them. I used people's strengths to help them rebuild. He had torn down. I was building up. He had chosen hatred. I had chosen healing. The last photo of Robert and me had been removed from the nightstand, replaced with one from last week. Me surrounded by the women from the center, all of us laughing, all of us free. The morning of what would have been our 43rd anniversary, I woke up without the familiar ache in my chest. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades, complete ownership of my day, my choices, my life. No one to cook breakfast for except myself. No one scheduled to accommodate but my own. The freedom was intoxicating. I made my coffee exactly how I liked it, with real cream and a touch of cinnamon, something Robert had always mocked as fancy nonsense. Sitting in my garden, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago. She would have been preparing Robert's favorite anniversary breakfast, wrapping a gift he'd barely acknowledge, planning a day around his preferences. That woman had died at the altar 6 months ago. In her place sat someone I was still getting to know, someone who had enrolled in college to finish the degree she'd abandoned for marriage, someone who laughed loudly at movies instead of keeping quiet to avoid disturbing anyone, someone who had just booked a solo trip to Greece because she'd always wanted to see the Parthenon. My phone rang. It was Alice, one of the women from the center, calling to thank me again. Her husband had hidden $3 million in cryptocurrency, thinking she was too ignorant to find it. With our help, she'd recovered everything and started her own business. "Margaret, you saved my life. I mean that literally. I wasn't planning to be here much longer when I found your center." These calls came daily now. Women who'd been financially imprisoned, emotionally destroyed, systematically broken down by the very people who'd promised to love them. Each story echoed my own, yet each woman thought she was alone until she walked through our doors. Mr. Peterson, William, as I now called him, stopped by with fresh pastries from the new bakery. We had plans to visit his daughter in Portland next month. He never pushed, never assumed, just offered steady companionship and genuine affection. When he kissed me goodbye, gentle and respectful, I thought about how different it felt from Robert's possessive claims on my mouth, my body, my entire existence. That afternoon, I stood before a room of 200 women at the center's monthly gathering. These weren't victims anymore. They were warriors, each one fighting to reclaim what had been stolen from them. Some were 25, some were 75. All had been told they were worthless, that they could never survive alone, that no one would believe them. "Ladies," I began, my voice strong and clear, "I want to tell you something important. The pain you're feeling right now, it's not your ending. It's your beginning. Every tear you've shed has watered the seeds of your strength. Every betrayal has taught you the value of your own truth." I shared the latest update. Robert's assets had been fully liquidated. His prison sentence had been confirmed at 12 years without possibility of early parole. Claire had been denied appeal and faced additional charges for perjury. But more importantly, our center had helped recover $32 million in hidden assets for women across 3 states. We were expanding, opening branches in 5 more cities. The moral of my story, I continued, isn't about revenge, though justice certainly feels good. It's about recognition, recognizing that the person who needs your love most is yourself. For 42 years, I poured myself empty for others, thinking that was love. But love isn't depletion. Love multiplies. Real love doesn't leave you exhausted and broke. It energizes and enriches you. A young woman in the front row raised her hand. Mrs. Thompson, how did you find the courage to expose them so publicly? Weren't you embarrassed? Embarrassed? I smiled. Honey, the only people who should be embarrassed are those who betrayed trust, stole from someone who loved them, and planned to destroy an innocent woman. I refuse to carry shame that isn't mine, and neither should any of you. The room erupted in applause. These women understood. We'd all been programmed to internalize shame for other people's crimes against us. No more. As the meeting ended, I looked at each face, some still bruised from recent battles, others glowing with newfound freedom. Every single one reminded me that my story wasn't unique, but my choice to fight back publicly had given others permission to do the same. Before you leave, I called out, I want to ask you something. What would you do if you discovered your spouse and best friend had conspired to destroy you? Would you have fought back publicly like I did? Would you have chosen a different path? Share your thoughts in the comments on our website. Tell us your stories, anonymously if you prefer. Every story shared lights a path for another woman in darkness. And remember, I added, my voice carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom, subscribing to our newsletter isn't just about getting updates. It's about joining a movement. Every woman who signs up, every story shared, every dollar donated helps another woman escape financial abuse. Together, we're rewriting the narrative from victims to victors. As the women filed out, many stopped to hug me, to share their own small victories. One had opened her first bank account in her own name. Another had hired a forensic accountant. A third had filed for divorce after finding her husband's secret family. That evening, as I tended my garden in the golden light of sunset, I thought about Robert in his prison cell and Claire in hers. They'd wanted to bury me, not knowing that I was a seed. What grew from that burial wasn't just my freedom. It was a forest of women, all growing toward the light, all refusing to stay buried. What would you have done in my position? Would you have exposed them at the altar or chosen a private path? Have you or someone you know faced similar betrayal? Share your story in the comments below. Remember to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more stories of triumph over betrayal. Together, we're stronger than those who try to break us.